Chapter 1. "Come in, Rodger," Nathan Dunn said to me. I walked into Nathan's office and moved to stand behind one of the chairs behind his desk. "How are you doing?" Nathan asked with a grin on his face. I knew his smile could only mean one thing. I was going out to space. Well, not alone. "I'm doing great, sir," I said. "What about you, sir?" "Absolutely fine," Nathan said. "We have been wanting this for a long time. You know what? Thing is, we were trying to develop ships capable of deep space travel as there was so much to look out. 1, air, 2, food and water, and, the basic things needed for space. Well, our newest spaceship has all those capabilities, and you'll be one of the first to explore deep space with her. Actually, since you're primarily the only one I trust with this mission, I'll need you to put together a team of astronauts and space explorers. A lot of money is at stake here." Nathan grinned like he knew some inside secret he wasn't willing to share yet. Nathan continued, "There will also be crewmen to keep track of things like the stores, power supplies, and how to operate the various functions. If your mission goes well enough, well, you don't need me to tell you how you'll be celebrated." No, he didn't. That brought a grin to my face. "No, you don't, sir," I said. "Exploring the universe for as long as we wanted. What could go wrong?" Within a month, I had put together a team and we were ready to depart. We reported to the space headquarters, and there we were given last-minute instructions on how to go about with our traveling. It went without saying that we wouldn't report directly back to Earth until after the mission, when we would give everything back to NASA and have them send us home. That was the usual. We all knew that. The space agency, however, went ahead to brief us on the normal rules they expected people to follow during their travels. We weren't supposed to use the internet while we traveled. We weren't to talk or write to anyone. And, above all, no alcohol or drugs. That was easy to agree to. We never used alcohol or drugs during any mission because we'd already lost too many friends and teammates that way. During the day of the launch, we boarded the spaceship. Once we had settled into our seats, we began checking equipment. The computer was connected to an onboard AI, so it wouldn't fall apart during our flight. Our food and water tanks were going to last us 3 months without fail. As for communications, we would receive a signal from the ship once the AI gave us notice that it was safe to begin broadcasting. Once that happened, a small radio antenna would come up from somewhere inside of the ship. It was meant for the astronauts' communications only and was designed to communicate directly with them when they were in orbit, which usually only lasted a couple hours or so, if they were lucky. This was to make sure we'd hear from each other throughout the journey. In addition to that, we'd be provided with several portable communication units for working between ourselves. These, like the radio, were only for communicating over short distances or within limited range. They had the capability to be powered by solar energy or by the ship's own energy source. The system worked fairly well under ideal conditions. In the event of trouble, we could simply cut off power to them and see if they worked or not. Well fastened to our seats, a sweet female voice from the onboard speakers said,
"Prepare for takeoff."
The engines roared to life. Then the ship began to lift slowly, steadily rising into the sky. The ship rose higher and higher till it achieved its top speed. It was then the AI said,
"You are free to use the ship's internal comms if necessary to communicate back to Earth."
This looks good, I thought to myself. Let's try this. I I leaned forward, speaking loudly into the microphone so I could hear my own voice coming through the PA system. "Hey guys, this is Rodger, reporting in." A few seconds later, I heard Sam's quiet voice answer.
"Rodger, this is Samantha, calling in. How's the view? Any sign of land below?"
"You bet. Just look down to your right. It's beautiful, Sam. Just incredible." Then came Dean.
"Hey Sam, it's me. Where'd everybody get off to anyway?"
"They've already gone. All that's left is for us to start heading out." Sam and Dean both laughed quietly at that comment before Sam said,
"Okay then, let's check in again later."
As soon as the connection was broken, I sat back and looked at the others. The ship vibrated as it rose, causing everyone to shift around slightly in their seats. In time, we got into space and the ship became steady. The gravity generator adjusted accordingly, keeping everyone comfortable. We floated silently for another 10 minutes, listening to the sound of wind whipping against the hull of the spaceship and the gentle thrumming of the engines. Eventually, we started hearing faint noises, sounds that could only mean that someone else was using the comms. I leaned forward and spoke, louder than before. "Hello? Hello?" No one answered my call. No one replied. I frowned and leaned back in my seat again. I sat like that for a moment, thinking to myself, was something wrong? Was there a problem with the comms, or perhaps even worse, maybe I should have tried to contact NASA first instead of waiting for them to call. Before I could consider how to fix it, I saw the screen next to me light up.
"Rodger, are you all right there?"
Samantha asked. "Yeah," I answered. "Everything seems pretty good." "Why do you ask?" I watched Samantha carefully as she typed something else onto the keyboard. She then looked up at me, her expression serious and concerned. Her eyes searched mine, but her gaze didn't linger for very long. It was quickly drawn away, like it was afraid that I might see too much into her. I wondered why that was. "Is anything wrong?" I went on to ask.
"Just wanted to double check you're doing okay,"
Sam replied. "Why wouldn't I be?" Sam paused for a minute, seeming unsure what to say.
"I thought something was wrong with the ship. I don't know if these readings are correct, but I didn't want to panic and put everyone in a frenzy with the wrong information. I'll check and recheck things down here to be sure everything is stable. Don't forget to do so on your end, though."
"I won't forget. Thank you." Chapter 2.
Warning.
Came the computerized female voice from the speaker.
Warning. Warning.
I sprang up from sleep as I listened to the voice of doom that woke everyone on the spaceship.
Warning. Warning.
It went on. I stepped out of my room to meet the chaos outside. I looked sideways and saw Dean. It seems he was coming to find me, as he froze with eyes wide as I called, "Dean, what's wrong?" "Troubles with the engines, sir," Dean said. "I've alerted the engineers, and they're currently looking into it." I nodded. "I'll be right down." Perhaps this was Samantha's unspoken worry, or something else. I returned into my room and properly got dressed. When I stepped out of my room, I met little chaos in the corridors and was glad of it. No one seemed to have any idea what had caused this strange occurrence. I made my way through the ship towards the engineer room, and from a distance, I could hear the clanging and crashing which only grew louder as I closed the distance. What was going on, I wondered. When I entered the engine room, I met Henry, the chief engineer with his comms, talking directly to controls on the situation. "Oh, thank God," he said when he saw me. "The captain is here." But even that, I knew, wouldn't be enough for us to survive, or make it out of this alive. I had heard of countless space accidents and incidents like this, but this would be the first time that I was witnessing one. "What's the matter?" I asked Henry. Henry shook his head. "I don't know, Captain. Neither do we know what caused it. So far, so many things have been damaged, but we've been trying to make repairs, only to have what we repaired torn to shreds again, which is why we're trying to find out what the problem is." It was a big spaceship, and worse, we were in space. We were hundreds of miles from home, and the odds of dying in space, having your remains cremated before it could get to Earth in a coffin, was a thing I never liked to consider, suddenly dominated my thoughts. "Have you checked our instruments?" "Yes," Henry replied. "Everything shows that everything is normal." He looked at me expectantly, but I just stood there. I'd never seen a starship crash, or known anyone who had died. This didn't sit right with me. I wanted to help them, but until I learned about what had happened here, I couldn't take action. All I could do was wait and see what was going to happen next. Suddenly, a small red light began blinking from one console in the middle of the room. It pulsed steadily as the lights began to flash from yellow to green, indicating damage. The engineer stopped working for several minutes to look at the readings before he turned and looked at me apologetically. "Captain," he said quietly, "if anything, they've gotten worse than ever, and the ship itself isn't reacting well to the stress." "You can fix it, can't you? Can't you repair it?" "We need some kind of new design. Maybe it has broken some of the delicate circuits, but even if we had all day, it doesn't look like we have enough time to go through all the necessary modifications. I'm sorry, but the ship won't accept any form of modification. You understand that?" I did. The ship had to be self-sustaining, otherwise there was no reason to fly. Without the power source, it would die from lack of energy. And without energy, the ship would slowly decay. In other words, without fuel, it would eventually explode. Basically, we could fall out of space. I turned away from Henry's earnest face. "How long before this becomes a permanent event?" I asked him. He took a moment to calculate. "It may not be too late by then. Even the best scientists can't predict these things. But we can try to figure out how to prevent this from happening again. Do you know anything about computers?" I shrugged. "We could spend our last days in space without getting to Earth." I tried to calm myself and thought hard to think of solutions. What were the rules about how an accident happens here on a spaceship? Should I tell someone? Who was qualified to do that if not the engineers?
"Captain,
I heard through my comms.
Captain, come in.
I answered Dean. "I'm here, Dean. What is it?"
We might have a problem here."
I looked at Henry. "Do your best." And to Dean I said, "I'll be there soon." I made my way to the control room. It wasn't easy navigating this massive ship by memory and imagination alone. It seemed almost impossible to navigate in a straight line and make sure I didn't miss my destination. And now, this ship was falling apart as we spoke, and we still needed repairs, which meant someone would have to stay on top of the ship, because otherwise, no one could stay ahead of the catastrophe. I was hoping on Henry, as his knowledge and skills could surely save us from this disaster, but with the look of uncertainty on his face, hope began to slip from my grasp. I opened the door to the control room and walked over to where Dean stood with a worried look, one shared by everyone in the control room since all their gazes was on me. "What is it?" I asked Dean. "Whatever damaged the engines may have messed with the controls," Dean said. "What do you mean?" "We can't ascertain where we are." "What?" "Yes. It looks like a different solar system, and most of the planets here are hard to recognize. Neither do they look like any planet in our solar system." The whole situation did just seem to get worse, but now it felt tense with the unknown. This registered fear in me that I looked to the screen and back at Dean. "How long did we sleep?" I asked in astonishment. "It's hard to say, sir. There's no record of the ship going into hyperspace drive, and that's not the worst of it." "What do you mean that's not the worst of it?" "We are slowly beginning to lose control of the ship." White-faced with surprise, I raised both brows. "What do you mean, slowly losing control? How?" "I am not sure how it started," Dean said nervously. "But every single panel and device in this place are malfunctioning at once. I've already checked all the panels on board, and nothing's broken yet. The damage appears everywhere." The alarms continued blaring. "What do we do now? What do we do?" My heart sank. "I wish we knew," Dean said. A part of me knew Dean's words weren't entirely false. If the ship really was lost, the situation was direr than anyone had realized. "You mean it will start flying around and crash into some world, or we might be left out here to die?" Dean nodded. "That's about it." My mouth fell open. How could such a thing happen in the middle of a crisis? "Is that all you can tell me?" I questioned him. "Yes, sir. It could be worse. At least we will be losing a lot more than a piece of equipment." I knew what he meant. There may be no survivors in the state of a crash. The ship jerked, and a computerized female voice said,
Please, fasten your seatbelt.
I rushed to my chair and strapped myself to the seat with the seatbelt, and just then, the ship began to speed for a planet that appeared on screen, temporarily vanishing my fears as I stared at it with recognition. "Earth," I whispered, while everyone else on the control ship screamed or shut their eyes, making some form of prayer or doing something else. We got closer and closer to this planet that very much looked like Earth from outer space. It was blue as an orb, and it had hard white clouds around it. Our ship, now put out of control, rushed towards this planet, and that feeling of fear returned as I shut my eyes and joined my colleagues to pray. Chapter 3. Soon, the spaceship began to spin in the air, and my eyes remained shut as I didn't just pray to survive this, but prayed for the rest of my colleagues as well. Then I prayed forgiveness if I didn't, and I deigned to include everyone also on the ship. The spaceship collided with the surface, this planet that looked like Earth, with a crash sound and an explosion that shook everything around, sending us all flying away from each other. The impact was enough to knock out most of our senses for some time before waking us up. My body ached everywhere, and I felt numb. I looked at my surroundings and saw people lying around, moaning and groaning. I tried to move to check their condition, but I couldn't get myself to do it without feeling pain all over my body, especially the back of my head. When I touched it, I felt a sharp sting, and when I turned my hand, I saw that it had been cut by something. My team had all fallen off different parts of the spaceship, which were still falling down, but luckily they were still alive. They were unconscious and breathing heavily, but at least everyone else seemed to be all right too, so that was good enough for me. I slowly got onto my feet to avoid further pain and looked around, trying not to think about how much pain I was in, because that would only make things worse. "Is everyone okay?" I asked. I got groans as reply. That was okay. We had survived. Lights flickered in the ship, and every here and there was a spark. I rested on the floor and tried to catch my breath for a moment. When I began feeling my body again, I took to my feet. I was breathing fine. I figured it to be the oxygen from the ship, as there was high chance that that was still functional. But there were holes through the ship, and so far, no one had any oxygen mask on. This was the second anomaly I noticed about this planet we had landed on. The first being that it looked like our world. Well, I didn't give it that much thought now, the resemblance. Perhaps anything was possible in space. But what intrigued me the most was where we ventured to. I went to get into a protective suit with oxygen, and with Dean and a few others also in protective suits, we stepped out of the ship. I looked at where we had crashed, and we so happened to be in a crater. We had landed in here in one piece. That was a thing to celebrate about. But I could see the challenge this posed. Soon, people would start complaining about how they needed to go home to their families, and, before long, it would most likely break into anarchy. Well, that I was going to avoid. We stepped out into this planet that looked like Earth, and we saw trees with green planets. The morning mist was strong, present, not seeming to fade. The sun was absent, and the ground also had Earth's soil texture. Strange. I knew that I wasn't dreaming, and this was very much real. This is definitely more than just a coincidence. Dean suddenly came up to me and asked, "What is this, Captain? Where are we?" I was as clueless as Dean. "I don't know, Dean. Let's keep looking." Apparently, where we had landed seemed to be in some kind of forest. The ground looked ancient and untouched, and the trees and leaves were wet. It was obvious that we had landed somewhere far away from the ocean or anything close to water. And this planet also didn't have a sun. Or if it did, the gray clouds did obscure that. But I couldn't find any sign of civilization nearby. We weren't even sure whether we were in the right place. If it was another planet, then what did that mean? Could this planet also be inhabited? What could possibly explain everything about this whole situation? I sighed. I hoped this wouldn't become a permanent feature of my life. I wanted to explore everything the universe had to offer. And yet, here we were, of all places on a planet that physically looked like Earth. We walked in our protective suits through the wood. "The air seems to be like that of Earth," Dean said. "It doesn't appear to be harmful." I too had sensed that from the ship, but we were trying to be super cautious, for in truth, we didn't know where we were and what we might encounter. There was no telling what might happen. At first, this was fun to explore. There were plants everywhere. Some of them looked similar to those from my own planet. Others looked strange, as though they shouldn't exist in another place entirely. But I soon stopped paying attention. I was focused on our environment. It was a bit eerie, actually, as we walked through these woods. I didn't feel like it could be natural. I felt like this was a trap, meant for us. And this place was huge. We had been walking for quite some time, and we hadn't seen anyone other than ourselves in what felt like minutes. There didn't seem to be any other living beings near us, nor did we see signs that people had passed that way. The atmosphere was still dense with fog and mist, though, so we wouldn't know for sure until it lifted. And the farther from our ship we went, the more I feared the outcome of our investigation. As a captain, what do you do when you meet a potentially dangerous situation? Do you call for assistance? Are you able to defend yourself against danger? Should I stay put? Should I leave? Would leaving save me? Questions that plagued my mind. The thoughts kept circling in my head like a broken record. and yet I didn't know if I wanted to answer any of them. Soon we came out to a clearing with large rocks. The ground was smoky, almost concealing the black, hard, rocky ground beneath our feet. And looking around, I noticed that the large rocks we had earlier spotted had the shapes of human faces. It was almost creepy how realistic they looked. A chill ran down my spine, and I shivered. A part of me felt a sense of excitement, as the mystery had finally begun to come to an end. But there was a bigger part of me that didn't want it to end, that was scared and uncertain about how long I'd last in this unknown world. These rocks were all carved out, and it looked like we had arrived at a graveyard of sorts, or a sacred site. No matter what we had encountered on our journey, nothing could be as terrifying as meeting such a disturbing phenomenon. The fact that there were humans here was already unsettling enough. The sight of these stones filled us with dread, as though whatever had killed them would soon come after us. But there was also the secret excitement, one which was solely on the fact that we were the first to discover this. There was nowhere else that we could have landed. No ships were around. The sky above had clouded. The atmosphere was thick and damp. And there was still a lot more work to do. For instance, we didn't even know if we had made the right decision. "Let's keep moving," I whispered to Dean. He nodded in agreement. "What do you make of it, Captain?" Dean inquired. I shrugged. "I can say that it looks like something we're seeing in an urban legend or something. We should report back to ship." "Yes, after we've covered a few more ground, then we'll report back to the ship." We walked past these rocks and came to a place of rushing waters. In front of us was what appeared to be the shoreline, the grasses, the trees. Everything was the same as Earth's land, except it was completely covered in moss and vines. "Captain, we haven't found any other people." "That means there must be some creatures here," I said with a worried expression. "Amazing they would see us as aliens on their world," Dean said. We continued exploring along the banks of the river. Everything was calm and peaceful here, and even without any warning, I felt at ease. But still, we had to report back. Suddenly, a scream broke my train of thoughts, and we all froze. "Captain, we're in trouble!" Dean called out. I immediately jumped up, ready for whatever could attack us next. I took off running towards the sound. "Stay behind me, guys!" I yelled at them, trying not to let myself panic. Something was wrong here. That much I could tell. "We're not alone here!" someone shouted. I stopped running and looked around. Nothing was showing itself. However, when I heard more voices, I realized something wasn't right at all. "Someone else is here!" another voice exclaimed. "Who could it be? Are they friend or foe?" another man demanded. I didn't want to wait to find out. I started valuing the idea of returning back to the ship. Perhaps we had seen enough, even though it wasn't really enough. I looked at everyone with me, and we were all accounted for just the way we had set out from the ship. So who had screamed? Had someone from the ship been following us? Or was this one of us trying to play a sick prank on this strange world? No doubt it would be unique, but foolish as this could put us all in peril. All the commotion seemed to lead us in an area that was completely deserted and silent, with no animals or sounds at all apart from the birds and other small creatures flying by. It was eerily beautiful, and yet this eerie quietness was a little frightening. The closer we got, the worse the silence became, making the hairs on my arms stand up straight again. It was though something was watching me and my men. Then, I heard something coming from a tree ahead of us. It sounded like crying, and I turned my attention towards the noise. Just then, two things occurred to me. First, why were there no animals or other signs that anyone was around? Or at least had tried to find other survivors. Then, who had cried just seconds before? "Captain, we need to get back now!" I called out to Dean and the others as loud as possible. We all turned and sprinted back over to the edge of the stream. The others followed me closely and quickly. When I reached the riverbank, the water ran through my boots, and I could see how shallow it actually was. I took a step forward, and the mud gave way under me, and I slipped slightly. And then I heard the sound again. Louder now. This time I could hear it clearly, and it made me stop dead in my tracks. A loud cry. It sounded like a woman screaming in pain, or maybe even crying for help. I heard more screams, like someone was being tortured. My heart began racing, and adrenaline began surging through my veins. I had to get over there. Something was going on. Just then, a tree collapsed onto the ground in front of me. It seems it was aimed to fall right on me, but it missed. "We really should return to the ship," Dean suggested. "Yeah," I said. "Run." We began running back the same way we had come, only much faster. I felt certain someone or something terrible was following us. Whatever it was closing the distance and gaining fast. We reached a path. There were trees lining both sides, which seemed to have been cut into pieces and placed here. I wonder how we were supposed to navigate through this mess. When we approached the first fork, we heard the loud roar behind us. Our first time here, and this world already wanted to kill us. We reached the rocks shaped as human faces and moved into the forest. We were closing to the ship. Soon we could see it in the distance, and I could see that most of the windows were intact. "We have to hurry," I shouted to Dean as loud as I could. He understood what I was saying and picked up his pace. This was probably the most exciting and scary thing that had happened to us since we had left the ship. I felt alive, despite the fact that I knew that I might die today. But I didn't want to stop. Not yet. We continued to run for a little while, until we suddenly saw a light in the distance. We headed towards where the light was coming from, and once we stepped foot outside the woodlands, we were met with an extremely wide view of the area. To our horror, we saw the ruins of an old town, one with an ancient setting. "Is that?" Dean stammered, his eyes widening. My mouth went dry. What was happening here? Where did all these people go? And why were they so scared of us? "Come on, let's look around," I said. With the sun high up in the sky, we could clearly see this new location. Dean and the others followed me towards a path leading deeper into the woods. When we neared the center of the ruin, we could hear the echo of voices speaking together. There was the crumbling of rocks that came all around us and making the place alive. Then, a voice that chilled me to the bone rang out loudly. It came like a whistle, and it was the wind, which was now circling all around us like voices forgotten, and they wished to be remembered. The wind blew harder than ever, making a deafening wail sound through the forest, creating such a strong gale that it created quite the disturbance, like a huge hurricane in a small clearing. Our helmets kept the sand away, so we were able to look. But then, a stone hit and cracked the helmet of one of the men with me, and we all took the hint and had to keep our heads down. It was as though it was breathing. With our heads down, we noticed the wind began to shift the sand, and that's when we saw it. Bones. Human bones scattered around. Dread greeted us, and I heard Dean mutter something that must have been a prayer. I looked at the men with me, and they began backing away slowly. I followed their gaze, and my joints froze. Hey, sci-fi horror fans. It's Thomas. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you'd like to become an official member of our channel, you can do so by clicking on the join button. Memberships start at only $5. Until next time, everyone. And remember, stay cosmic.